I first discovered my passion for writing when I tried to write my first book as a sophomore at my college. It was basically this book about this kid that was aggressively average in this dystopian future. So he didn't qualify for state benefits, but he also wasn't allowed to have the good jobs that he wanted. He was so aggressively middle of the bell curve, top of the peak, that literally his life wasn't open to anything. He understood that he wasn't smart or dumb. He was neutral. Now, this book was a total flop because I was super inexperienced. I will not rewrite this book. I don't like the premise of it. I think it's derivative. Now, my style at the time was underdeveloped. My diction and vocabulary were bordering on non-existent. I was not versed in metaphor or simile or foreshadowing or any other narrative device or utensil. Yada yada, you get the picture, right? But my inexperience was not my only fault. It's not the fact that this premise was so bad. The premise is fine.
No, Jeff, this is not a mistake. You tested into the crayon group. No. This is a mix-up, right? No, Jeff, this is your name. This is your test right here.
My inexperience was only a factor. As a novice writer, I had no idea what I, as the reader, would want to read, because I wasn't a big reader at all. I had really never read a good book. So since then, I've tried to broaden my palette. I've taken in sources of inspiration, and I've read and written and played and watched tons of good and bad writing since then. Video games, movies, TV, short stories, books, you name it. And from these sources, I've taken notes. Notes to help me in my writing future. And notes that seem super basic to me now, that I couldn't live without, that I can't even forget or ignore. Now, I wish I kept that first draft of my terrible, terrible book, because I did, in fact, finish it. But I didn't. I didn't keep it, and I didn't send it to anybody, so I don't have a copy of it. But I do remember one thing that I constantly told myself on a few rereads. I reread it about once a week after it was finished for about 4 weeks straight. And I remember that I told myself hundreds of times, Carson, you are ruining your own writing. Now, if you missed my last video, I have a link in the description and there's a card above my head, but I'm writing a surreal psychological horror novel. I've been researching a lot of writing, not just horror, but writing in general, and I'm trying to broaden my palette when it comes to genres of horror. I'm going to be focusing on mostly horror writing today, but I want you to keep in mind that almost all of this advice is general. Just writing in general is what I'm trying to focus on. In my adventures of research, I've come across some commonalities that really frustrates me as the reader, as the consumer. Things that I'm keeping in the back of my mind to help me write better stories. So here's a collection of some of the stuff that I hate. I want to start with a short story called Big Boned by one Christy DeMeester, published in The Dark magazine. Big Boned revolves around these beauty pageant girls who have their sights set on winning their pageant at all costs. The story revolves around these young girls performing rituals to appease a supposed beauty goddess to help them win. These rituals include frankly disturbing things like bloodletting and cannibalism. Each girl is painted as blood-hungry, cold, jealous, and vindictive, but they're all working towards the same goal, that goal being to appease this beauty goddess and win. It explores complex themes through this mode, like how are monsters made? It says something insightful, like a lot of monsters are made of their own volition. Each of these girls is a monster of their own making. They expel their morals for victory or to just fit in with each other. They want to win by any means necessary, even if that means literally worshipping a demon. Their passion turns into obsession. A poignant commentary on beauty standards and the industry being predatory by nature is all that this story needs. It's perfect. But the ending throws it all out the window, because it reveals in the last few paragraphs that there really is a beauty goddess, and it's really a demon, and it wreaks havoc on the entire pageant venue, kills everybody inside, and then sets its sight on world domination. Now, horror doesn't need to have symbolism, or underlying meanings, or doublespeak, or undertones, and social commentary. No, slashers and gore films are popular because they're implicitly scary. They make the audience queasy without the need to preach. However, painting these pictures of these girls being just obsessive and delusional just to undermine it in the last second makes the reveal that this goddess was real all along underwhelming. Because I didn't even want the goddess to be real. It's a total letdown. I wanted it to just be a social commentary on the beauty industry, the beauty standards. I would have liked to have seen some other girl that's uninitiated in their bloodletting beauty cult be the victim of their monstrous actions, be the victim of their wrath by scoring higher with the judges and ultimately winning the pageant. It should have continued to talk what it was already talking about. Obsession, wrath, ends justifying the means, fitting in with a group, beauty, but it undermines it in the finale. So, note to you writers, do not undermine your own work. The reason this particular example feels cheap is because the weight of these girls' decisions are completely nullified by the reveal. They did not attempt to cannibalize a girl that stepped out of line because they wanted to get back at her for cheating, but because they felt like they had to. The goddess controls their decisions, not them. The goddess is no longer a symbol of success and wealth and validation and beauty standards, but it's just a demon. It's just a demon. And that is a petty ending. So often people undermine their own work on their finale, or sometimes even halfway through. And I have another example. Now, I just need you to please promise you won't be mad at me. This next one is pretty divisive, so I need you to bear with me and I need you to hear me out before I finish. Because obviously some of the things that I'm going to be talking about I understand are wrong, but it's a problem with the writing. I think Attack on Titan's ending undermines the entire series. I'm not going to list everything. But for starters, the show places so much emphasis on genocide being implicitly wrong, which is something people can get behind. That stands to logic, that stands to reason, although there is no reason. Something cannot stand to reason if there is no reason given. Hanji literally says genocide is wrong and then offers no reason why. How about mentioning some inalienable rights like life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness first and foremost? Why doesn't it establish a baseline for the conflict instead of leaving it so implicit? Genocide is wrong because it's just wrong, okay? Now, this is fundamental because the final solution in Aaron's eyes is genocide. And for all intents and purposes in this show, Aaron has literally become God. He can see the future. He has nigh infinite knowledge, and he has nigh infinite power. In every instance of the future, every loop of time he's been trapped in, that he's played out and that he's watched, every cycle of the same timeline, with every different option he tried, he found no other solution to end the cycle of hatred. So then, why stop him? If this is the only way to break the cycle of abuse and the perpetuation of violence, this time loop that Aaron is stuck in, why would you stop it? You have to convince me as the viewer, the reader, the consumer that it is in fact a noble cause to stop a genocide that ends all war and genocide. You have to convince me first that a nearly omnipotent, all-knowing God can be in fact wrong. But then you also have to convince me that this thing he's doing is in fact wrong in of itself. It's not enough to just say God can be wrong. You have to prove it. Then you have to prove that this thing he's doing is wrong so that you can prove that the force trying to stop a God from being wrong is in fact noble. And it seems like the author is convinced that the ends don't justify the means. I think that's what he was getting at. And that's a straightforward idea. We can get behind that as viewers. But you have to show me why not. Let's do a little thought experiment. If there is a sudden, drastic spike in suffering on the graph of suffering, that is quickly followed by a distinct lack thereof, a complete flat line of all suffering, why is this bad? Should things not get way worse before they get infinitely better? You could convince me that it's cruel. You could convince me because it won't work in the first place. For example, a lot of the wars in this fictional universe are caused solely by race. But how about showing me that war is not only caused by race? How about showing me that war can be caused by things like religion, turf disputes, and resources? And how about because it's antithetical to the freedom Aaron wanted in the first place? The loss of life is implicitly anti-freedom. That's why he was against the euthanization plan. And how about because of literally any reason at all? I could go on forever and ever about any reason that doing a genocide, no matter what it's for, is wrong. But the show doesn't even give us one. It just says genocide is wrong because genocide is wrong. And this frustrates me because Attack on Titan takes a lot of time to set up its powerful themes only to contradict or abandon them on the final steps. Take Sasha Browse's family, for example. When they find Gabby, the girl who killed Sasha, her father forgives Gabby. He delivers a heartfelt speech about how we need to get the kids out of war. It's a moment that suggests the story is moving towards its message of healing and breaking the cycle of violence and recognize the tragic manipulation of children through propaganda. And then, in the very next beat, we send the Anti-Eren Squad, a group made of barely adults and literal children, straight into another war. The same war that just a moment ago we were told to protect the children from. And this just isn't just ironic, it undercuts what the story is trying to say. Instead of reinforcing the idea that war corrupts and exploits the young, the story just moves on. Because the show leans so heavily on the audience's preconceived notions about these things like war, death, genocide, and propaganda. But it stops talking about them, and it never answers this fundamental question. Do the ends justify the means? Because if they do, then Eren is actually the good guy doing the best thing for the entire world by ending suffering once and for all. This would, of course, mean the anti-Jaegerists are actually the bad guy. Now, you see how the entire story flips on its head because you don't answer this very fundamental question. Do the ends justify the means? Instead, you just say God is wrong because he's wrong, okay? And that's not a very satisfying way to go about telling your story. Now, stepping back a bit, I guess one of my main problems with Attack on Titan's final episodes is that it doesn't just undermine its own message, but that it's sort of skeletonized, like how I mentioned that there's not a lot of reason that genocide, to end all genocide, is a bad thing. There's not quite enough substance to say what it wants to. Now, on the flip side, it's also possible to do the exact opposite. It's possible to add too much to your story, or even further, to add too much without enough substance. Subplots that take you out of the main story, like the sewer scene in Stephen King's It novel. And again, this doesn't just apply to horror. For example, the entire Assassin's Creed series has the exact same problem. Focusing on too many things at once instead of honing in on the important stuff. Falling down. Eyes wide shut. I can go on. But there's something even worse than inflating your literary achievement with narrative bloatware. Works like The Human Centipede, Slow Torture Puke Chamber, and Martyrs, and that's just to some extent, because that's a particularly good movie. But they all suffer from something far worse than just a little too much complication or narrative bloatware. I've heard this term referred to as Squick before, and it's basically just the act of including something in your work to elicit revulsion to said thing. Instead of actually working to horrify your audience, you just disgust them. And Squick has its place in things like slasher films and body horror for sure, but in more psychologically based pieces such as Silence of the Lambs or Eyes Wide Shut, Squick is just a cheap way to elicit a reaction. Squick does not elicit fear or build a tense scene, it only serves to elicit disgust or discomfort. And for example, Silence of the Lambs tries to characterize Hannibal Lecter as this person who's interested in the deepest part of every character's psyche. But in reality, he just makes himself look like a freak. He comes off as creepy, but it's not because he's scary. It's because he's weird. He comments on whether or not a character can still feel the sensation of breastfeeding of their daughter that's been kidnapped, who's an adult now. That shit's just weird. It has nothing to do with whether or not you miss your kidnapped daughter. It's not playing mind games. It is simply there just to elicit disgust from her, and by extension, the audience. Because she doesn't even play into his mind games. She's just like, okay, I'm done here. And then she starts leaving, to which Hannibal literally has to beg on his hands and knees for her attention by giving her what she wanted. There's another scene where some prisoner who's behind regular iron bars instead of the same enclosure Hannibal is in for some reason, jerks off into his own hand and throws his semen at Clarice. He then promptly kills himself the next day. That is weird. It's not scary, it's just gross. He did not affect the story in one way or another. If he was completely removed, the story would play out the same. He doesn't even matter after his death anymore. Not to anybody. So why include it? A Serbian film, American Horror Story, Cannibal Holocaust, all of these are marked with degeneracy and squick, grossness for the sake of grossness. One of my subscribers told me to look up a video called Nothing is Punk Anymore, and the link is in the description if you want to go watch that. But one of the first pieces that this guy defends as being punk is a movie from 1972 called Pink Flamingos, where, and I'm reading off of the Wikipedia here, one of its main attractions is a fat transvestite eating dog crap off of the sidewalk. He defends that as punk instead of what it really is, sensationalist, degenerate, squicky garbage. Grossness for the sake of grossness is not the same as building horror, so I urge you, if you're writing in horror, do not confuse what makes your medium good. If you're writing at all, do not confuse what makes your medium good. Do not undermine the things that you have been building. Do not narratively bloat your work. Do not leave reason up to interpretation. Do not squick. When you undermine your own themes, when you drown your story in fluff, or when you mistake the underlying emotions of your work, like in the case of confusing disgust and fear, you tend to ruin your own writing. So that's going to wrap up this video for today, and I just want to make one thing clear. I mean no hate to anybody who helped produce any of the things that I mentioned in this video today. If I insulted one of your favorite movies, TV shows, scripts, short stories, or anything, I'm sorry. It's just my personal opinion. Feel free to disregard it. Feel free to argue with me. If there's anything that I love, it's engaging with your comments. They are some of my favorite things to read because a lot of you guys have a lot of interesting things to say. So if you've got video ideas, send them my way. If you've got critiques for me, send them my way. If you've got literally anything for me, send it my way. I will read it and I will respond to it. I guarantee it. Okay, thank you. Bye.